historians. With me are the historically old Declan Doyle, Decky, and Rod Smith. Hey, Rod, how we doing?
Historically,
How we
oh,
get
doing
on this
well,
week,
thanks, doing
lads?
well.
I'm old in dog years, lads. That's what I meant. Old
Oh,
in dog
right,
years.
right.
Okay,
That's
so
nice.
Okay.
yeah, we were dogs
I
for
got a
the
bir-
ancient.
I got a birthday card one time off my daughter, and it said, "In dog years, you'll be dead."
No, accurate, but
Oh yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Charmed on your birthday, though, wasn't it?
Ah, well, it's factual.
Right, crack
How are
on.
how are you getting on, Rodney?
Not a bother, Sean. Thanks. Yeah, good to be back. Good to be here again.
Yeah,
Yeah, talking about a
it's been a
history.
while. We've got a lot of sunlight outside now.
Yeah.
We are what's the start of April, 10th of April.
Yes.
Was Valentine's our last one?
Ooh.
Could have been. Could have been. I don't think we've done one since, so that'll tell you.
My goodness.
Has it been that
Yeah.
long?
Well, I suppose.
Happy Valentine's Day.
Happy Valentine's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Valentine's Day. Valentine's Day.
Yeah. So we've gone through Paddy's and
Okay.
we're on the cusp of Easter, but let's keep it going, guys. We'll try and be a little bit more prolific than we have been.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah,
Keeping track of the religious festivals.
exactly. All right, guys. This week I'll go first, and I will talk about. Hang on one second, if I can get my notes in order here. The a vessel called the MV Kerlog, and it's part in the Second World War. I'll bring it to December 1943, December 29th. And this is a relatively small Irish coaster boat. It's 142 feet, like less than 40 meters, so 35, 40 meters. And it was carrying a cargo. It had gone to Lisbon and it was carrying a cargo of oranges back to Dublin. It was a Wexford steamship company boat. And it came across total carnage from the war in the Bay of Biscay as it was making its way back up to past Portugal up to Dublin. It was two Royal Navy, British Royal Navy cruisers had kind of shelled a flotilla of German ships, and they sunk a large destroyer and two torpedo boats, German torpedo boats. So this was a raging war scene. And they'd moved on, but there were approximately 700 Germans, some dead, some burnt, some injured, in the water on the area. Now, it wasn't directly in the path of the Kerlode, but the Kerlode saw a German plane flying towards them and got in a little bit of a panic. But the German plane dropped flares. So the crew, which is only a small crew, was 11 men of the Kerlo, followed the destination of the flares, and they came across the carnage of the German soldiers, 700 odd in the sea. So some dead, some injured, some barely hanging on to debris, basically, and desperate for help. Like at this stage, you kind of go with the Kerlog itself had been bombed a couple of months earlier with the then captain broke both his legs and had been attacked by two warplanes that ended up being British when they were mistaken for a French vessel, which had obviously French had been occupied by Germany at the time. So yeah, a bit of a balls there by the British. So, and at the time, there was 800 vessels all in all during the war, where 800 Irish vessels were either destroyed or attacked at one point or another. So, during the war, so they didn't really. You'd be forgiven if they just if these men turned a blind eye and went on, but they didn't. They stopped and they used everything they could, grappling hooks, and grabbed as many of the German soldiers from the sea. as they feasibly could without their actual vessel sinking. So on this like 40-meter long vessel, they managed to get 168 German soldiers out of the water. Um, and a harrowing part of them was some of them who were very badly injured had to be thrown back to make room for those who were likely to survive. So these 11 men had serious decisions to make over 10. They stayed around for 10 hours until the captain basically dragging these lads out of the sea until the captain basically called it off because they could fit no more. So they had the 11 crew and 168 German soldiers who they kept below deck during daylight as they made their way back out. The UK, the British were very much aware of their involvement in this rescue, and they were given radio orders to make their way back to Britain with them, which would have been less of a hazardous journey. It would have been quicker than going where they eventually ended up in Cork, in Cove, with these lads on board. Now, four of them died during the I think it was 3-day journey from where they were back to Cove. And they ignored the pleas from the Allies to hand over. So they really stuck by their principles of neutrality. Yeah, it was harrowing. Like there's 57 of those 168 German soldiers were in the engine room, just lying around. They used gauze and salt water from the sea to try and. There's no doctor obviously on board, so they tried to patch them up and eventually got them back. What was 164 at this stage, back to Cove. Some of them were treated there, and some of them were taken onto the Curragh eventually, where they were interned there and looked after um, by Irish medical staff. So yeah, it's not a great, not an ideal story for the from the British point of view. As we said, we resisted, or the lads resisted calls to bring them back to the UK. But the German minister in Dublin wrote to the captain. It was Captain Donahue, and he just said, "Look, it's an exemplary deed. It was worthy of the great tradition of Irish gallantry and humanity and neutrality." So it was a very, very brave thing to do because the wars were very choppy. This was like the heights of the end of December into early January. So they were at huge risk to themselves by doing this. So yeah, I just like that story. I think it's just a great story. You can kind of go, there's a train of thought that would think neutrality is just turning a blind eye, but I think the bravery shows it's neutrality is kind of more of a principle than anything else, and you can still show that there's other ways to show bravery, you know. And that's me.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I
Wow.
haven't heard any of that.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, and they were down your way. I think a few of the lads were from Dungarvan. They were all of the crew. There was a couple from Dublin. They were working for a Wexford company. There
Cool,
was a
okay.
couple from Dublin, a good few from Waterford, and a few from Wexford as well. Yeah, so it was a real just absolute put their lives on the line, and like these were accustomed to seeing bodies wash up from these battles in Cork
Yeah,
and around the place. So yeah, it was just what a decision to make to actually go and
yeah,
take on the elements and potential the allies potentially as well, you know,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
um, because the same boat had been bombed by the allies now accidentally a couple of months before. So but they resisted the pressure from the UK. I think Fishguard it was. They wanted them to bring them into Fishguard. And you wouldn't know what they would have faced there as opposed to getting them back to Ireland and fixing them up, patching them up, you know.
That's insane.
It's a cracking,
Yeah, it's a nice
great.
old story.
That's a
Yeah.
cracking story. Yeah.
And I think they're still celebrated. Yeah, it's a well-known story in Germany. I think a couple of the crew in their older age used to go over and they had a great bond with obviously these lads and their ancestors. It would have been hundreds of people that these would have been heroes with. So they made many the trip to Germany after in the as they got older. And yeah, lifelong friends and yeah, heroes in Germany.
A cracker.
Mad. Didn't you used to keep the German prisoners of war up in the Curragh?
Yeah, that's where yeah. So that's where these lads ended up.
Yeah, yeah.
They were fixed up in Cork, and the ones that were healthy enough were up to the Curragh. But they weren't prisoners of war. They were more protected, and all made their way back to Germany after the war. You know.
Not all of them.
Yeah,
No,
yeah,
a lot of them stayed
Well-
here because they'd married. There was
Yeah.
an open prison, so they could go off. It had to be in by a certain time. You know, so a lot of them were going down the dances around Kildare and all that crack.
Oh, very good.
That's
Very
another
good.
story. I think then that's for another week. Definitely we'll have to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. If you're going to be a prisoner of war, that's the way to do it, isn't it?
Get a call in.
Yeah, absolutely. So, perfect. Who wants to go next, guys?
So, Jackie, you
I'm
hop
busy.
in. Hop in, Jack.
I'll hop
Okay.
in, so I'll hop in. Pretend to bus
Okay, Decky, go for it.
Now, I had one prepared about Jimmy Gralton, but it's been a while and I've no idea where it is. So bear with me. I've wandered a bit further down the globe, away from Leitrim, and we're down near Papua New Guinea. It's not far. There's an island down there called Bougainville. Now, Bougainville has claimed independence many times over the years, most generally ignored. They were owned by the Japanese, the Australians, Papua New Guinea, whole host of people. Or the Americans had a go down as well during the war. So everyone's had an ownership of this, even though the Bougainvillians have claimed independence many times. Now, there is an Irish connection to this. You'll be fascinated with this at the end. Now, the Australians, along with the British, moved into the island because it's full of metals. Oh, Sean's gone. And metals were precious at the time, especially they're even more important if you get them for nothing. So they started mining the island. Where's he gone? The Bougainvillians didn't mind, as they didn't know anything about mining. They were an island nation, but they weren't very well developed. So the mining companies started putting in roads, factories, mines, the whole chamouli, employed a lot of the people on the island. And after a while, it became quite apparent that they were destroying the island. These people lived on the island, they relied on the water, the plants, everything on the island to live in. And they were noticing it was getting destroyed, the water was getting ruined, massive land destroyed. So they made their complaints known and they were ignored. So one of the evenings, a gentleman by the name of James, can't think of his surname, broke into the place and stole a load of dynamite. And they blew the living lard out of the mine. And then a war began. The Papua New Guineans sent over the PNGDF, which is the Papua New Guinean Defence Forces. And rather than calming things down, they escalated the violence. At first, it was only a handful of people who just blown up the mine. And through the escalation, more and more people joined in because they seen the behaviour of the PNGDF. Got to the point then, a full-scale revolution had taken over. And they had no weapons at all. The Papua New Guinean had a full army, helicopters, the whole lot. These lads had absolutely nothing, but they were still fending them off. What they were doing was they were using all the metal that they found in the mines, bits of equipment, any number of things, and they were fashioning weapons out of this, scrap stuff, upcycling as it were. So they made these kind of they were like crossbows, but they were metal. They were able to take down helicopters with them. And if they took down any machinery or any of the weaponry from the Papua New Guineans, then they installed the weapons. Now, this became known as the Coconut Revolution. Because I'll say these people had very, very little in modes of technology and the whole crack. So they were using coconut oil to maintain the weapons, the tanks, the whole lot. The Papua New Guinea army, they were on foot then. Now, this was told by the leader of the revolution. He didn't mention the herb involved, but he did mention the herb. That they used to put this particular type of herb down in the tracks. And the Papua New Guinean army go over it. Whatever had happened with this herb, their testicles swelled to the point that they were unable to move. So they'd be on the ground, massive bits, and then the rebels would move in, detain them, and take their weapons. So they were building a bit of a cache of weapons. The Papua New Guinean army were there for 10 years, and there was 20,000 people dead there at this stage. So this is now in the 80s, and I never heard of this until maybe 10 years afterwards. Because they were making no headway into this, the Papua New Guinean government decided to get mercenaries. The mercenaries they got was part owned by Margaret Thatcher's son. No said. So they arrived, but the Papua New Guinean army who were on the island had discovered that the mercenaries were getting a lot more money than they were getting. So they revolted. So that was the end of the mercenaries. They had to be taken out because the Papua New Guinea army were revolting against their own government because of bringing in these mercenaries. The fight continued and continued. More people died. It made it to the world papers because the Australians were involved, the English were involved, there was mercenaries involved. Americans, I'm not sure how the Americans fared out in this. Very little talking of them. But it became a focus on the world press. Papua New Guinea started withdrawing their armies. Still kept control of the place. And this is where it gets fascinating. And the Irish connection. The United Nations decided to send over a peace envoy to Bougainville. And it was a man by the name of Bertie Ahern. So they had a vote for an independence there in, what was it, 2001, after the peace deal was signed. And they hope to have full independence by either later on this year or next year. So it's a wild place. And this war went on, 20,000 people killed. Heard nothing, not a blip. I say these people had nothing. They were attacked by this massive army, and all they had was bows and arrows.
Bertie went in and sorted it out for them.
Well, this was after he was disgraced now.
Yeah, wow.
You know, after his episode of being in a cupboard pretending to write sports journalism, that was the last I'd heard of him. And then all of a sudden, a couple of years later, he popped up here.
Oh.
So now I'm not certain that it was done. It wasn't much publicised after that, but the peace deal was broken in 2001. There you are now.
Okay. Whoa.
So Bougainville, it sounds a bit chocolatey.
It does. It does.
Doesn't
it does. A bit of dark, yeah, a dark chocolatey story there.
Of course, yeah.
But
But again, 20,000 people died and they took on 3 massive nations.
Well, there's some resilience in fairness.
Yeah. Absolutely. I said, I'd love to know what the hair was. They didn't go into detail on it.
No, it just makes your testicles unfeasibly large. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Like, were they weighed down by these testicles, or were they just very, very sore testicles?
By looking at them that were lying on the ground, it wasn't a mechanical issue.
Ouch. Okay. I
They
think
looked
before we go into,
you know?
we're getting into the reams of over 18s now, adult materials. I'm going to jump into my axe murder story of South of Korea from 1976.
Oh, very PG.
Okay.
This is for all the young
Is
people
there
out there.
testicles in this one, Ross?
There are no testicles in this. But
Any
there are
private
axes.
parts whatsoever?
There are
Boobs?
axes and there are killings. This is This is the demilitarized area in Korea after the Korean War in the early 1950s. Ends in a stalemate. So they have then an area, the demilitarized, which has North Korean troops, South Korean troops standing almost next to another, beside one another, and you have United Nations troops there as well, supported by the US. So in 1976, so this is the guts of 20 odd years after, 23 years after the wars ended, this line is still there manned by North Koreans, South Koreans, and United Nations. There's a big tree blocking an observation post. So the UN send out a team to prune back the tree because it's blocking their line of sight. So they sent this US captain, Captain Boniface, and his first lieutenant, Barrett, and they go with some South Korean soldiers and a few laborers and some other soldiers to go off and bring axes just to prune the trees. They don't bring weapons with them because it's agreed that you don't have weapons in this demilitarized zone. So they start pruning the tree, and then some North Korean soldiers appear, led by a fellow called Pak Chul, and he was known as Bulldog because he'd had a few run-ins with the UN before, causing a bit of ruckus and a bit of trouble. And so the lads are cutting away in the tree, and eventually Bulldog tells them to stop pruning the tree, and they ignore him. He shouts again, saying, "Stop pruning that tree," and they ignore him. So they get attacked, and he shouts out, "Kill them." So one soldier, so the captain, Boniface, gets killed immediately. He's clubbed to death. He's hit with clubs and axes. Lieutenant Barrett then tries to escape, run across his footbridge, but he's chased down as well, and he's killed also. And it lasts about 3 or 4 minutes. Others are injured, but they manage to escape. But actually, a team that were there actually filmed everything, so they actually caught everything on camera to show that it was completely unprovoked. So as you can imagine, the United States were absolutely incandescent at the treatment of the US soldiers. So at the time, President Ford ordered, they sat down, they said, right, are we going to bomb North Korea here? What's the price that we should get them to pay? So they said, no, what we do is we'll show them how strong we are, what a big army we have. So they literally send in a huge amount of weapons and arms just to cut this tree and to show off the military strength. So they send in 2 platoons with 30 soldiers in each. They also send special forces teams, 27 helicopters, B-52s, fighter jets, and they also have gunships on standby and an aircraft carrier on standby as well. And they also have South Korean troops as well. And they literally walk across to the tree. No one says anything. They don't make any eye contact with any of the North Korean soldiers. And they decide to remove the tree completely. So after about 45 minutes, the tree is removed from a line of sight. And North Korea afterwards they sent out a statement to say that the incident was regrettable and that their guards acted in self-defense, even though the video recording showed otherwise. And it's one of the few times that North Korea has actually said anything, has sent any messages of regret. And from then on, they decided that they would physically separate North and South Korean soldiers at this checkpoint. But the US and South Korea stood on high alert for years after this incident because it was something that could have ultimately led to a war. And they used the phrase Paul Bunyan diplomacy to kind of summarize the American response. So Paul Bunyan would have been a famous woodcutter in lore and legend from the US and Canada. And it was basically the show of strength. If America feels itself threatened, they refer to what they call this Paul Bunyan diplomacy, is where they will throw everything at this solution to kind of warn other nations, this is the power we have, beware. And probably something still very relevant today, what's happening at the moment, but it's 1976, cutting a tree, almost ended up in a war, ended up then in a huge show of force just to get the tree cut down. And the tree is gone. They put up something in its a memorial or a monument in its place that's still there to this day. So there you go, the famous axe tree murders from 1976 on a lighter note.
Wow, okay. Very good, Roz. I
That's
didn't know
mad.
about that.
I watched a documentary on that only recently.
Okay.
It was called The Tree That Nearly Started World War III.
There you go.
Because when I remember, I was fascinated at the start, and then when the Americans started listing the things that they were bringing in, it just sounded like a full-on campaign. And this is over the tree.
Yeah.
So, you know, it was insane. Yeah, but they beat the shit out of the lads with clubs.
Yeah. No,
It was
it's
highly violent.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was absolutely insane. It nearly kicked off over a little tree.
Yeah.
But not a little tree. I think it was a maple, was it?
Oh, the month now. I think it
Can't
was
remember.
April, May. I think it was May. I think. Yeah, you're not far off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating story.
Yeah.
That is mad. That is nicely obscure. I like that. That's we don't do enough modern history. We don't do enough modern history here. So that's a nice one. Brilliant, lads.
Excellent.
That's great. Yeah. So clubs and testicles, and it's been an interesting one, lads. Yeah, and yeah, with the glorious day out here. We'll wrap it up. So, and lads, let's do one pretty soon.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Hey, the good guys.